This is Dr. Amelia Bueche, founder of This Osteopathic Life for the health of all things. As a specialist in neuromusculoskeletal medicine and osteopathic manipulative medicine, I have dedicated my professional career to the study of the intricate design of the human body and understanding how the structural components, nerves, muscles, and bones can influence the function of the entire system. Quality movement directly relates to quality health, and it's important to have the right tools for optimal strength, flexibility, and mobility. Through these videos, I lead you through clear and concise exercises that you can use to find optimal health through movement. It is important to note that while I am a physician, these videos do not constitute medical advice, nor do they replace the important relationship between you and your personal physician. Before beginning any exercise plan, it is important to consult with him or her to ensure these are the right exercises for you, your particular diagnoses, and your current state of health. Thank you for joining me, and let's get started finding best health through movement. In this episode, I'll be covering strengthening exercises for the lower extremities, and it's important for the legs to be strong to provide a solid platform to support our low back and spine and improve our posture overall. We'll cover the squat, the hinge, and I'll also add in some lateral movement for improved pelvic stability. The squat is essentially a sit to a stand. So anytime you sit and stand up, you're performing a squat. And that's an easy way to incorporate strengthening movements into the course of your day. When you go to sit, add a few extra reps. So instead of just sitting down, you might sit down once and then twice, and then commit to sitting and increase reps over time. The things to think about with a squat are to find the right stance for you. Some people it's right under their hips, some people it's a little bit wider, so you find that appropriate stance. And the first thing you want to do is sit back. And we never want to initiate a squat by sitting forward and letting the knees drift forward. You can see I'm kind of losing that curve in my low back. If I sit back, I can help maintain that curve and also call on the strongest muscles of my legs. And then I press into the ground and stand tall. And there are various depths that you can reach with the squat. It might just be a quarter squat here and standing. That starts to wake up those muscles. And like I said with the sitting, you could use a stool, a taller height to sit and to stand. And you could rest in between and still do some more reps, or you could just barely touch the surface. I'm not putting a lot of pressure down and stand again. And over time, you graduate to a lower and lower height. Ideally, we're able to squat to below parallel with the hip crease below the knees, still working on keeping the chest tall and the knees out, and ideally the heels planted on the ground, and then stand back up. The reason being, if we find ourselves picking something up from the ground in a squatting position, if we haven't built the strength around the knees and the hips here, it's going to be really hard to come back up and out of that. If you want to increase the depth of your squat and don't quite have the strength or the mobility yet, you can use something to help support you, kind of walk your way down to see if you can find that height with something to work against. And you can see that you might have more depth and mobility than you think you do as you're working on building strength. Okay? So that's the squat. The other main movement we use with the lower extremities is a hinge. And a hinge is like a deadlift. And sometimes that word can sound scary, but all it means is we're picking something up on the ground that's still or dead, and we're lifting it, right? And so to do that, we think about having a pivot point through our pelvis and keeping the chest always tall and proud. And so what I'm going to do is think about just sending my hips back. Okay? And you can see my legs are relatively straight, and that's the start of the hinge movement. Sending the hips back, keeping the chest tall and proud. I'm loading my hamstrings and glutes here, and I'm squeezing them to stand tall. I'm not feeling the work in my back. When I'm here, my back muscles are engaged. You know, they're active, they're firm there, but they're not doing the work of me standing up. Okay? And if I start to hinge and allow myself to release that curve in my low back and let my chest fall from being tall and proud, then I do use my back to stand up. And that's not what we want to do. So we want to think tall, proud chest, hinge at the hips. And if I'm trying to pick something up on the ground and I'm not there yet, my arms aren't low enough, I can bend my knees, still keeping them back, still keeping my chest tall and proud. I'm not changing that angle. And I can get to whatever it is on the ground, press my feet through the floor, and come back to stand. And you can see how developing your strength in the hinge can be useful, because if you don't have that depth yet for the squat, and even in the squat, sometimes we get a little too forward bent in the spine. If we use a deadlift or a hinge to get there, we can really protect our backs more effectively. Okay? So that's the deadlift. And to train that, you can do the third base coach stance, where you come to here. You can think about, in baseball, the third base coach stands like this when he's waiting, because it's an efficient and effective way to stand. With the knees forward, that would fatigue really easily. My calves are doing a lot of work. My back's not very well supported. And if I were here, that would also wear out my back over time. So standing like a third base coach, coming back up all the way to full extension, and then repeating that. That would be a good exercise to use for starting the deadlift. And over time, you can increase how low you get and maybe add some resistance. Pick things up for reps to strengthen the deadlift. The last movement I'd like to cover is just lateral walking. And what this does is wake up glute medius, which is a pelvic stabilizer, and we just walk in a lateral plane, just like this. So I'm only moving in this plane of motion. The reason being is it wakes up this muscle, so when you're on uneven surfaces and the pelvis might give way or rotate, it helps to keep better integrity there. Sometimes you'll do this with a resistance band, like in therapy or maybe in the gym, and that is okay, but you also don't need it. You can just walk laterally, and after a minute or so, you'll notice that muscle will tell you that it's working hard. So those are the three major movements to strengthen the lower extremities: the squat here, the hinge here, and the lateral walking here. All right, thank you. Thank you for joining in on this episode of This Osteopathic Life, Best Health Through Movement. This is Dr. Amelia Bueche, and we'll see you next time.